Have you ever looked at someone you love and felt a faint, almost imperceptible shift, like the air between you had changed, though nothing on the surface seemed different? I remember the exact night that feeling crept into my chest, uninvited and cold. It was a Thursday evening, one of those Chicago nights when the city hums softly under a curtain of drizzle. Claire sat across from me at our favorite cafe, the one with the crooked window frames and cinnamon lingering in the air. She was stirring her coffee absently, her eyes unfocused, as if her thoughts were miles away. Claire had always been fully present. When she laughed, it filled the room. When she spoke, her gaze locked onto yours with disarming warmth. But that night she felt elsewhere. Her smile came half a beat too late. Her answers carried the weight of distraction. "Long day?" I asked, watching her spoon trace slow circles in the cup. She blinked, almost startled. "Yeah, just work. Deadlines." Her voice was calm, but her hands betrayed a slight tremor. "My name is Daniel. I'm a 34-year-old graphic designer, husband of 7 years, and until recently, a man who believed love, real love, was unshakable." Claire and I met at a publishing firm when a broken printer forced us into conversation. She smelled of jasmine and carried herself with a quiet certainty that drew me in instantly. 3 years later, we married by Lake Michigan in a ceremony that was equal parts imperfect and unforgettable. Our life together wasn't extraordinary, but it was ours. Sunday mornings were for farmers' markets, weeknights for shared meals and Milo, our golden retriever, sleeping at our feet. Claire would hum while cooking, and I'd pretend not to burn the garlic bread. We fit easily, naturally. But recently, subtle changes had begun to puncture that rhythm. Late nights at work multiplied. She guarded her phone with an unfamiliar protectiveness. She started dressing with a new deliberateness, lingering over the mirror a little longer, applying lipstick before casual team dinners. I noticed. I told myself not to. Trust was the foundation we'd built everything on, and doubt felt like a betrayal in itself. Yet, sitting there that night, rain tapping against the glass, I realized something unspoken had entered the space between us. She glanced at her watch, then back at me. "I should get going. Early meeting tomorrow." I forced a smile. "Of course." She stood, kissed my cheek quickly, and left. The bell above the cafe door chimed as she disappeared into the misty street. I sat alone, staring at the empty chair across from me. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a temporary absence. It felt like the beginning of a quiet, widening distance. I didn't know it then, but that night was the first crack in the story I thought would never break. The changes began like faint ripples on calm water, barely noticeable at first, easy to dismiss. But ripples, if left unchecked, grow into waves. Claire's late nights at the office multiplied. At first, they were occasional. Then they became routine. She'd text short, efficient updates, running late. "Don't wait up." No emojis, no warmth. Just facts. Her absence slipped into our evenings like a quiet intruder, rearranging the familiar shape of our days. At home, I tried to fill the silence with the television, with work, with Milo's cheerful insistence on walks. But the spaces she once occupied felt heavier now, like rooms holding their breath. When she did return, she brought with her a scent I couldn't place, subtle, expensive, not ours. Her explanations remained consistent. Campaigns, clients, late presentations. She was convincing. She always had been. But beneath the smooth surface of her words, something had shifted. I watched her one evening as she prepared for another meeting. Her movements were deliberate, hair styled more carefully than usual, lipstick in a shade I hadn't seen before, heels replacing the sneakers she typically favored after work. "You look nice," I said, trying to sound casual. She glanced up, surprised. "It's just a client dinner." Her answer was simple, but there was a flicker in her eyes, too quick to define, but impossible to ignore. I told myself not to question further. I wanted to trust her. Trust had always been our quiet strength. But trust without clarity began to feel like standing in a dark room, hoping there wasn't a cliff a few steps ahead. Even our conversations changed. Where once they were filled with shared jokes and stories, they became fragmented, reduced to schedules and logistics. She'd scroll through her phone mid-sentence, her attention elsewhere. One night, unable to silence the unease, I asked, "Is everything okay between us?" She looked up from her laptop, expression soft but distant. "Of course. Why? You've just seemed far away lately." She reached over and squeezed my hand, a gesture meant to reassure. "I've just been busy, Danny. Really. Don't worry so much." Her voice was warm, practiced. I nodded, though something in me whispered that the truth was buried beneath those calm words. Over the next weeks, that whisper grew louder. I began noticing patterns, the late returns, the phone always face down, the way her laughter, once ours, now belonged to someone on the other end of the screen. One evening, as rain blurred the city lights outside our window, I stood in the kitchen watching her type furiously on her phone, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She didn't notice me. For the first time, the thought formed clearly, cutting through denial like glass. There's someone else. I didn't confront her then. I wasn't ready for the answer. But in that moment, the conflict I'd tried to ignore became undeniable. The life we had was shifting beneath my feet, and I could no longer pretend not to feel the ground move. Once the suspicion took root, it grew quietly, steadily, like ivy creeping up a wall. I didn't want it there, but I couldn't unsee the patterns that had begun to form. Claire's phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, became an object of careful protection. She kept it face down, even during dinner, and carried it with her from room to room. Notifications were silenced. Passwords changed. I told myself not to read too much into it, but the sudden secrecy lingered like a question no one wanted to ask aloud. I noticed other changes too, small, precise shifts that painted a clearer picture when assembled together. She began dressing with deliberate elegance on days that didn't seem to call for it. Her laughter, when it came, had a lightness I hadn't heard directed at me in months. And in the quiet hours before sleep, she'd lie beside me, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. I tried to keep our routine intact. I cooked her favorite meals, suggested weekend plans, even booked tickets to a play she'd once mentioned wanting to see. She accepted everything politely but with a distracted air, as though her body was present but her mind had already crossed a line I couldn't follow. The distance between us stopped being metaphorical. It was there, in the pauses between sentences, in the way she no longer leaned toward me when she laughed, in how our shared silences had shifted from comfortable to strained. One night, unable to contain the unease any longer, I offered, "Maybe we should take a trip, just us. Get away for a weekend." She hesitated, then gave a careful smile. "That sounds nice. But things are hectic right now. Maybe later." It was a gentle dismissal, but it carried weight. Later had become her favorite word, a soft curtain drawn over every uncomfortable truth. I began staying up late, working at the kitchen table, half watching the door as the hours crept by. She'd return long after midnight, exhausted but evasive, offering explanations rehearsed enough to sound smooth. Client dinner ran long. Presentation revisions took forever. Traffic was a nightmare. Each excuse was believable on its own. Together, they formed a wall I couldn't break through. And then came the moment that shifted suspicion from quiet thought to sharp reality. Her phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the shower. A name flashed on the screen, Ethan. The preview read, "Last night was incredible. Still thinking about you." I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. That single line cut through every layer of denial I had built. I stood there, heart pounding, knowing that everything was about to change. The silence between us had grown too wide to ignore, and now, it had a name. The message from Ethan replayed in my mind long after the screen dimmed. "Last night was incredible." Those 4 words echoed through the house like an unfamiliar voice in a familiar room. For days, I carried the knowledge like a stone in my chest, heavy and unmoving. I observed her with new eyes, each gesture, each casual lie, each distracted glance, seeing the threads of deception woven neatly into the fabric of our life. I wanted to confront her immediately, demand answers, shatter the illusion. But a strange calm held me back. If I confronted her too soon, she might retreat behind well-rehearsed defenses. I needed truth, not performance. I chose the cafe where we'd had our first real conversation. Quiet, tucked away, impossible to confuse with anything casual. I asked her to meet me after work, and when she walked in wearing that familiar blue coat, I felt the cruel irony of nostalgia pressing against the reality of the present. She greeted me with a practiced smile. "You sounded serious on the phone. Is everything okay?" I gestured to the seat across from me. "Sit down." Her expression faltered slightly. She sat, folding her hands neatly on the table like someone preparing for a negotiation. I didn't waste time. "Who is Ethan?" Her reaction was small but telling, an almost imperceptible flicker in her eyes, a tightening around her mouth. She recovered quickly, but the silence that followed betrayed her more than any confession could. "He's a colleague," she began carefully. "Why are you asking?" I saw the message. My voice was calm, too calm. "On your phone. Last night was incredible." Color drained from her face. She looked down at her hands, then up at me, as if searching for the right lie and realizing none would survive the moment. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said finally, voice trembling. "It started after that campaign launch. We were working late and I just lost track of the lines." Lost track? The words burned. You don't just accidentally end up in someone else's arms. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt strangely distant, as if watching the scene from outside my body. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything," she whispered. "But then it did. And I didn't know how to stop." The world around us shrank until it was just the two of us, the woman I once believed incapable of betrayal and the man realizing he had been living inside a story someone else had already rewritten. For the first time, I understood that betrayal isn't always explosive. Sometimes it unfolds softly, like pages turning in a book you thought you were writing together. She reached across the table, her hand trembling. "I still love you." I didn't move. Her words landed like fragile glass, pretty, but already broken. The truth was finally out, and with it, the quiet foundation of our marriage began to fracture. The days following the confession unfolded with quiet inevitability. There were no shouting matches, no broken dishes, no dramatic exits. Instead, there was a muted stillness, as if both of us understood that something fundamental had already cracked beyond repair. Claire slept in the guest room. We moved around the apartment like strangers temporarily sharing the same space, careful not to brush against each other. Conversations became practical, stripped of warmth, dividing bills, discussing Milo's feeding schedule, avoiding anything that touched the raw center of what had happened. I spent long nights at the kitchen table, the same place where I had once imagined our future. Now, I sifted through memories like someone handling fragile artifacts, trying to distinguish what had been genuine from what had been quietly eroding. She tried to explain more than once. "It wasn't about replacing you," she said softly one evening, standing in the doorway. "I just felt lost. And with him, I didn't. I can't explain it better than that." Her honesty, though painful, wasn't cruel. It was simply what remained when pretenses fell away. And in a strange way, that hurt more than any excuse would have. I realized then that betrayal doesn't always end with hatred. Sometimes it ends with two people standing on opposite sides of a broken bridge, looking at each other with a mixture of sorrow and recognition. The decision to separate came quietly, like everything else. We both knew clinging to what we had would only turn love into something bitter. She found a small apartment a few blocks away. I kept Milo in the home that now felt both familiar and foreign. The first morning without her, the silence was sharp. Her coffee mug sat untouched on the counter. Her favorite sweater still hung on the chair where she'd left it. For a moment, I almost called out her name, instinctively, like I had for years. But no one answered. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild, not dramatically, but slowly, deliberately. I returned to painting, something I'd abandoned years ago. I met friends again without checking the clock. I learned the contours of my solitude, not as something to fear, but as space to grow. Claire sent me a letter one spring afternoon. It was short, handwritten in her familiar looping script. There were no apologies, only a single line that stayed with me long after I folded the paper. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I just didn't know how to be the same for you." I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply sat with the words, letting their weight settle. Some stories end with dramatic closure. Ours ended with quiet understanding. The love we shared was real, even if it couldn't survive. And sometimes, that truth is both the wound and the balm. As I watched the sun dip below the city skyline that evening, I realized this wasn't the end of my story, just the end of ours. Would you like the video? Please subscribe to our channel.